The night is cruel. The rain pounds the empty streets, washing away the dirt but not the pain. Streetlights flicker, casting long, haunting shadows. And in the middle of it all, a dog, a broken, battered stray, drags itself forward. His hind legs are useless, twisted, and shattered. Every pull forward sends a sharp tremor through his thin body. His ribs poke through his matted fur. His eyes, glassy with pain, hold something deeper, despair. A car speeds past, throwing a wave of filthy water over him. He doesn't react. He can't afford to. He keeps going, keeps pulling himself forward. The sidewalk is just a few feet away, just a little more. His front legs tremble as he struggles against the curb. He whimpers, a soft, broken sound swallowed by the night. No one sees him. No one hears him, until Jason does. Jason, a man in his early 30s, stands under the awning of a closed cafe. He's rugged, dressed in a worn leather jacket, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He's seen his share of suffering, but something about this dog, this tiny, broken creature, hits him in a way he doesn't understand. Jason exhales, a cloud of breath mixing with the cold air. He should keep walking. He knows better than to get involved. But he doesn't move. He watches as the dog tries again to pull itself onto the sidewalk, failing miserably. It whimpers, defeated. Jason curses under his breath. Damn it. He steps forward, kneeling beside the dog. The animal flinches, expecting the worst. Jason slowly extends a hand. Hey, buddy, it's okay. I got you. The dog stares at him, eyes full of fear and exhaustion. Jason doesn't rush. He lets the dog see he means no harm. Then with gentle hands, he scoops the frail body up. The dog lets out a weak whimper but doesn't resist. Jason holds the dog close, shielding it from the rain as he rises to his feet. The storm rages on, but for the first time in a long time, Jason feels something other than numbness. Let's get you out of here. Jason kicks the door open with his foot, holding the dog tightly against his chest. His apartment is small, cluttered, and dimly lit by the neon signs from outside. The faint hum of traffic seeps through the cracked window. He sets the dog down gently on the couch, grabbing an old towel from a chair and draping it over the trembling body. The dog barely moves, exhausted beyond measure. Jason crouches in front of him, his fingers hovering near the dog's head. You all right, buddy? No response, just those weary, half-lidded eyes staring at him, as if waiting for the next bad thing to happen. Jason exhales, rubbing the back of his neck. All right, let's fix you up. Jason sits on the floor, an old first aid kit open beside him. He dabs antiseptic on the dog's wounds. The dog flinches but doesn't fight. There's no energy left in him to resist. Jason examines the hind legs, both broken, swollen, and stiff. He clenches his jaw. Damn. Someone really did a number on you. The dog looks up at him, eyes searching. Jason feels something twist in his chest. He sighs, placing a gentle hand on the dog's head. You're safe now. He leans back, rubbing his hands over his face. The exhaustion of the day is catching up to him, but he can't sleep. Not yet. He stands up, heading to the small kitchen. Rummaging through his fridge, he finds an old pack of cold cuts. He hesitates, then shrugs. Guess this is better than nothing. He places a few slices on a plate and sets it down in front of the dog. The animal sniffs hesitantly, then starts eating in small, careful bites. Jason watches. Yeah, that's right. Take it slow. For the first time that night, something inside him eases. Jason wakes up to the soft sound of breathing. It takes him a second to remember. The dog, the rain, the broken body he carried home. He sits up on the couch, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The dog is still there, curled up on the blanket he placed beneath it, chest rising and falling in, slow, steady breaths. He checks his phone. 6:45 a.m. The city outside is already waking up. The sound of distant honking, muffled voices, and the occasional siren fills the air. He sighs, stretching before glancing back at the dog. Guess we made it through the night, huh? The dog doesn't respond, but there's something in its posture that seems lighter, less tense. Jason takes it as a win. He pushes himself off the couch and moves toward the kitchen. Coffee first. Then, figure out what the hell to do next. The machine sputters and groans as he waits, leaning against the counter. His eyes drift back to the dog. You got a name? The dog stares at him silent. Jason sighs. All right, I'll come up with one. A knock at the door. Jason frowns. He isn't expecting anyone. He walks over, opening it just enough to see who's there. It's his neighbor Maria, an older woman in her 60s. Sharp eyes wrapped in a thick cardigan despite the warmth. She looks past him, into the apartment. You got a dog? Jason hesitates. Not exactly. Maria frowns. Did you find it like that? Yeah. She studies him for a long moment, then sighs. Hold on. She disappears down the hall, returning a minute later with a small container. Chicken broth might help him eat. Jason takes it, surprised. Thanks. Maria nods, then lowers her voice. Vet's expensive, but there's a clinic down on 12th. They won't ask too many questions. Jason nods. I'll figure something out. She gives him a knowing look. You always say that. Jason closes the door, turning back to the dog. Looks like you got people looking out for you already. He kneels down, opening the container and pouring some broth into a shallow dish. He sets it in front of the dog, watching as the animal hesitates, then slowly begins to drink. Jason exhales, leaning back against the couch. Yeah, I guess we'll figure this out together. Jason stares at the dog, still weak, but slightly more aware. He picks up his phone, scrolling through his contacts before stopping at a number he hasn't called in a while. His fingers hover over the screen. He exhales sharply, then presses the call button. Yeah? A gruff voice answers on the other end. Eddie, I need a favor. A pause, then, what kind? Vet kind. Another pause, then a chuckle. You got a pet now? Jason glances at the dog. Something like that. Bring it by. You still know where my shop is? Yeah, I remember. Jason hangs up and looks back at the dog. All right, buddy, time to get you fixed up. Jason carefully wraps the dog in a blanket, lifting him into his arms. The dog doesn't resist but lets out a small whimper. I know, just hold on. He steps outside, the morning air cool against his skin. The city is awake now. Cars honking, people rushing past, street vendors setting up their stalls. Jason walks quickly, keeping his head down. He takes the subway, ignoring the stares from strangers. The dog remains still, eyes half closed. Jason pushes open the door to Eddie's clinic. The place smells like antiseptic and old wood. Eddie, a stocky man in his 40s, leans against the counter, arms crossed. Let's see what you got. Jason lays the dog gently on the examination table. Eddie's expression shifts from amusement to concern as he examines the wounds. Damn, someone really messed this guy up. Can you fix him? I can try, but it won't be cheap. Jason swallows hard. I'll figure it out. Eddie studies him for a moment, then sighs. I know you, man. You don't ask for help unless you're out of options. He pats the dog gently. I'll do what I can. You just owe me one. Jason nods. Yeah, I know. Jason sits in the waiting area, bouncing his knee. The clock ticks slowly. He stares at the peeling wallpaper, lost in thought. A memory flashes. Rain, blood, the helpless weight in his arms. Hey, he looks up. Eddie stands in the doorway, wiping his hands on a towel. He's stable, gonna take time, but he's a fighter. Jason exhales, relief washing over him. Thanks, man. Eddie smirks. So, you got a name for him yet? Jason looks through the glass at the dog, resting peacefully on the table. Yeah, I think I do. Jason watches the dog sleep, his body rising and falling steadily. He leans against the wall, exhaustion creeping into his bones. Eddie nudges him. "You look like hell. Feel like it too. Go home. Sleep. I'll keep him. Here tonight. Monitor him." Jason hesitates. "You sure?" Eddie nods. "Yeah. Besides, he's in better hands here than on your couch." Jason runs a hand through his hair, then nods. "All right. I'll be back in the morning." Jason steps outside, the cold air biting against his skin. The city hums around him, a constant noise that never fades. He pulls his jacket tighter and starts walking. His apartment feels different when he enters, emptier. He stares at the blanket, on the floor where the dog had been, then sinks onto the couch. He doesn't even remember closing his eyes before sleep takes him. Morning. Jason jolts awake, his heart pounding. He checks the time. 7:13 a.m. He grabs his jacket and rushes out. The door. Eddie is waiting outside the clinic, a cup of coffee in hand. "Relax, he's fine." Jason exhales, running a hand over his face. "How is he?" "Better than I expected. He's still got a long way to go, but he's got fight in him." Jason follows Eddie inside. The dog is awake, his eyes sharper than before. He lifts his head slightly at the sight of Jason. "See?" Eddie smirks. "I think he likes you." Jason kneels down, running a hand gently over the dog's fur. "Hey buddy, you hanging in there?" The dog blinks slowly. Jason smiles, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. "I gotta ask though," Eddie says, crossing his arms. "What's the plan?" Jason looks up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you keeping him? Or you just patching him up and sending him on his way?" Jason hesitates. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He looks back at the dog. "I don't know." Eddie sighs. "Well, think fast. He's got nowhere else to go." Jason stares at the dog, something shifting inside him. "Yeah, I know." Jason walks beside the dog as they make their way back to his apartment. The dog moves slowly, still weak but determined. Jason keeps glancing down at him, ready to catch him if he stumbles. The city is alive around them, but for the first time in a long time, Jason feels like he's moving at his own pace. He unlocks the door, stepping aside to let the dog enter first. The dog hesitates, looking up at him. Jason nods. "Come on, it's home now." The dog limps inside, sniffing around, taking in the new space. Jason watches him for a moment before heading to the kitchen. He grabs a bowl, fills it with water, and places it down. The dog drinks slowly, carefully. Jason kneels beside him. "You're gonna be okay." The dog lifts his head, eyes meeting Jason's. There's something there. Trust, maybe. Jason exhales, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess we need a name for you, huh?" He leans back against the counter, staring at the dog. Names swirl in his mind, but nothing feels right. Then he remembers something. An old stray from his childhood, one he used to sneak food to behind his father's shop. The name comes back, to him like a whisper. "Murphy." The dog tilts his head slightly. Jason smirks. "Yeah, that fits." Days pass. Murphy grows stronger. Jason adjusts his routine, making sure to be home in time to feed him, to clean his bandages, to sit with him as he heals. The apartment feels less empty. The quiet isn't so heavy anymore. One night, Jason sits on the floor beside Murphy, scratching, behind his ears. "You know, I didn't think I'd keep you. Didn't think I needed anyone." Murphy sighs, resting his head on Jason's lap. Jason chuckles, shaking his head. "Guess I was wrong." Outside, the city hums. But inside, for the first time in years, Jason feels at peace. Jason wakes up to the sound of soft breathing beside him. Murphy is curled up on the floor, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Jason watches him, for a moment before pushing himself up. He stretches, running a hand through his hair, and heads to the kitchen to start the coffee. The smell fills the apartment, blending with the faint scent of rain drifting in from the window. Murphy stirs, lifting his head. His eyes, once dull with pain, now hold a quiet curiosity. Jason places a bowl of food down, watching as Murphy slowly gets up and makes his way toward it. His steps are steadier now, his body stronger. Jason leans against the counter, sipping his coffee. "You're getting there, buddy." A knock at the door makes him turn. He glances at Murphy before moving to answer. Eddie stands in the hallway, arms crossed, an amused smirk on his face. "So, this is where you've been hiding." Jason steps aside, letting Eddie in. Murphy watches from his spot near the food bowl. Eddie whistles, crouching down. "Look at you. Didn't think you'd make it this far." Murphy tilts his head. Jason folds his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "He's a tough one." Eddie straightens. "So are you. Didn't expect you to take this on." Jason shrugs, taking another sip of coffee. "Didn't expect it either." Eddie studies him for a moment before nodding. "Well, you're doing good, both of you." Jason exhales, glancing at Murphy. "Yeah, I think we are." The days turn into weeks. Murphy's strength returns. He moves with more confidence, his limp barely noticeable now. Jason finds himself settling into a rhythm. Morning walks, late-night talks, quiet moments where words aren't needed. The apartment feels different, warmer, less like a place to sleep and more like a home. One evening, Jason sits on the balcony, Murphy beside him. The city stretches out before them, lights flickering like stars. Jason runs a hand through Murphy's. Never thought I'd have someone around again." Murphy nudges his hand, leaning into him. Jason chuckles, shaking his head. "Guess life has a way of surprising you." Murphy lets out a soft sigh, curling up beside him. Jason takes a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past slowly lifting. He looks out at the city, the noise fading into the background. For the first time in a long time, he isn't alone, and for the first time, that feels okay. Jason wakes up earlier than usual, the city still cloaked in a soft pre-dawn glow. Murphy stirs, stretching his legs before looking up at him expectantly. Jason smirks. All right. Let's go." They step outside, the cool air wrapping around them as they walk through the quiet streets. The city feels different at this hour, less hurried, more alive in its stillness. Murphy walks beside him, his steps confident now, his tail swaying slightly. Jason finds himself enjoying the peace, the feeling of just existing in the moment. They reach a small park on the outskirts of the neighborhood. Murphy sniffs around, taking in every scent as Jason watches, hands in his pockets. An elderly man sits on a bench nearby, feeding birds. He glances at Jason, then at Murphy. "That your dog?" Jason hesitates before nodding. "Yeah," the man smiles. "Good dog, loyal." Jason watches Murphy for a long moment. "Yeah, he is." They stay in the park for a while, Jason lost in thought, Murphy lying beside him. The world around them moves slowly, the first hints of morning light creeping over the buildings. For the first time in years, Jason doesn't feel the need to rush. He lets the moment linger, the quiet settling deep into his bones. When they finally head back, Jason glances down at Murphy. "Maybe we should do this more often." Murphy wags his tail as if in agreement. Jason chuckles, shaking his head. "All right, buddy. Looks like we've got ourselves a new routine." The city is waking up as they return home, the streets filling with life. Jason steps inside, Murphy following close behind. The apartment feels warm, familiar. Jason exhales, a small smile tugging at his lips. He never thought he'd find comfort in routine, in company. But here he is. And for the first time, he doesn't want to be anywhere else. Jason wakes up the next morning to the sound of rain, pattering against the window. Murphy is curled up at the foot of the bed, his breathing slow and steady. Jason swings his legs over the side, rubbing his face before standing up. He grabs his jacket, knowing Murphy will want his walk despite the weather. They step outside, the crisp air carrying the fresh scent of rain. Murphy's ears perk up, his tail swishing slightly as he steps into the wet pavement. Jason pulls his hood up, shoving his hands into his pockets. All right, let's get this over with, buddy. The streets are quieter than usual. A few cars roll past, their headlights reflecting on the slick asphalt. Murphy trots ahead, his nose low to the ground, taking in the sense of the damp morning. Jason watches him, a small smile tugging at his lips. As they round a corner, Murphy suddenly stops, his body tensing. Jason follows his gaze and spots a figure slumped against the wall of a closed shop. A man, wrapped in tattered blankets, his face barely visible under a hood. Murphy takes a hesitant step forward, sniffing the air. Jason pulls gently on the leash. Come on, Murph, let's keep moving. But Murphy doesn't budge. Instead, he lets out a quiet whimper. Jason sighs, glancing back at the man. He's motionless. For a brief second, Jason debates walking away, but something inside him won't let him. With a reluctant exhale, he kneels beside the man. Hey, you all right? No response. Jason hesitates before reaching out, giving the man's shoulder a light shake. The figure stirs, groaning softly. Jason notices the hollow cheeks, the way his fingers clutch the blanket for warmth. Murphy moves closer, his nose pressing against the man's hand. The man shifts, his fingers twitching. Slowly, he opens his eyes, staring at the dog with a mix of confusion and exhaustion. Jason pulls out his wallet, hesitating for only a second before fishing out a couple of bills. Here, get yourself something warm. The man blinks at him, as if unsure whether to accept. Jason doesn't wait for a response. He places the money beside him, then tugs Murphy's leash gently. Come on, let's go. As they walk away, Jason feels Murphy glance back a few times. He sighs. Yeah, I know, buddy. Wish I could do more. The rain continues to fall, the city moving past them in muted colors. Jason keeps his head down, his mind unsettled. He thinks about how close he once was to ending up like that man. How easy it would have been to slip through the cracks, to disappear. If it weren't for Murphy, would he have pulled himself out? Back at the apartment, Jason dries Murphy off with a towel before collapsing onto the couch. Murphy jumps up beside him, pressing against his side. Jason exhales, rubbing his hands together. Guess we've both come a long way, huh? Murphy lets out a small huff, resting his head on Jason's lap. Jason absent-mindedly runs his fingers through the dog's fur, staring out the window. The city stretches before him, vast and indifferent. But for the first time, he doesn't feel like it's swallowing him whole. He's still here. And so is Murphy. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Jason wakes up to the sound of distant sirens blending with the early morning hum of the city. He rubs his face, stretching out the stiffness in his back. Murphy is already awake, sitting by the window, watching the world outside. His tail thumps lightly against the floor as Jason swings his legs over the side of the bed. Morning, buddy, Jason murmurs, running a hand through Murphy's fur as he passes by. The morning routine is familiar now. Coffee brewing, the faint sound of news murmuring from the TV, and Murphy patiently waiting by the door. Jason clips on the leash, and they step out into the crisp air, the city slowly shaking off the remnants of night. They walk in silence, Jason lost in thought. He keeps thinking about the man they saw the other day. He wonders if he found shelter, if he used the money for food, if he even made it through the cold night. It's a hollow feeling in his chest, the realization that there are so many stories, unfolding in the shadows, so many people forgotten by the world. Murphy tugs on the leash, breaking Jason's thoughts. They're near the same alley where they saw the man, and Jason hesitates before looking down the narrow passage. The spot is empty. The blankets are gone. Jason doesn't know if that's a good sign or not. With a sigh, he keeps walking. Murphy stays close, sensing the shift in Jason's mood. They take the long way home, the quiet streets offering a moment of peace. Jason doesn't rush. He lets Murphy stop to sniff, lets the city breathe around him. Back at the apartment, Jason tosses his jacket onto the couch and sinks into the chair by the window. Murphy jumps up beside him, his head resting on Jason's knee. Jason absently scratches behind his ears, staring out at the world beyond the glass. A knock at the door startles him. He wasn't expecting anyone. Murphy lifts his head, ears perked. Up. Jason pushes himself up and moves to the door, peering through the peephole. It's Eddie. Jason opens the door, stepping aside. Didn't think I'd see you so soon. Eddie smirks, stepping in. Thought I'd check in, see how you and the mutt are holding up. Jason snorts, motioning toward Murphy, who's watching Eddie with cautious curiosity. He's doing good. We both are. Eddie studies Jason for a moment, before nodding. Yeah, I can see that. They sit, the conversation shifting between old memories and new realities. Eddie talks about work, about the chaos of the city, about how time keeps slipping away. Jason listens, but his mind drifts. He's thinking about purpose, about change, about the unexpected turns life takes. You ever think about doing something more? Jason asks suddenly, catching even himself off guard. Eddie raises an eyebrow. More? Jason gestures vaguely. Something that matters. Something that actually makes a difference. Eddie leans back, considering. Didn't peg you for the philosophical type. Jason exhales, shaking his head. Neither did I. They sit in silence, for a moment before Eddie speaks again. Maybe it's not about doing something big. Maybe it's about the small things, the things you do when no one's watching. Jason glances down at Murphy, who's watching him with quiet understanding. Yeah, maybe you're right. Eddie grins. Of course I'm right. I'm always right. Jason chuckles, shaking his head. The weight in his chest feels a little lighter. Maybe he doesn't have all the answers. Maybe he never will. But for now, he's here. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. Jason stands by the window long after Eddie leaves, watching the city breathe. Murphy sits at his feet, his head resting against Jason's leg. The world outside is a blur of lights and movement, but inside, everything feels still. Jason exhales and turns away, running a hand through his hair. Come on, buddy, let's get some fresh air. Murphy wags his tail, trotting toward the door. The night air is cool, wrapping around them as they step onto the sidewalk. Jason shoves his hands into his pockets, glancing down at Murphy, who's sniffing at a lamppost. There's something about these late-night walks that makes everything feel a little clearer, like the noise of the day has finally settled enough for him to hear his own thoughts. They pass the spot where the homeless man had been. It's still empty. Jason lingers for a second before shaking his head and moving on. He doesn't know why it's been bothering him so much, but it does. As they turn the corner, a voice calls out from behind. Hey, man! Jason stops, his body tensing instinctively. He turns slowly, his eyes locking onto a figure stepping out from the shadows. It's the homeless man. His face is gaunt, his eyes tired but alert. He's clutching something in his hands, a small paper bag. Didn't think I'd see you again, the man says, offering a hesitant smile. I just wanted to say thanks. Jason blinks, caught off guard. For what? The man lifts the bag slightly. The money. Got me a meal. A place to crash for the night. I needed that. Jason shifts, suddenly unsure what to say. I'm glad. Murphy steps closer, sniffing at the man's leg. The man chuckles, reaching down to scratch behind Murphy's ears. Good dog. Loyal. Jason studies him for a moment. You got a name? The man looks up, hesitation flickering across his face before he nods. Tom. Jason nods back. Jason. They stand there in silence for a beat, the city humming around them. Jason isn't sure what compels him to speak next, but the words come out before he can stop them. You got anywhere to go? Tom exhales, shaking his head. Not really, but I'm figuring it out. Jason hesitates before finally saying, You hungry? Tom's eyebrows lift slightly, like he hadn't expected that. Yeah. Jason nods toward the diner across the street. Come on, let's grab something. Tom studies him, as if trying to gauge if this is real. Then slowly, he nods. All right. They cross the street together, Murphy trotting beside them. The diner is mostly empty, the neon lights casting a warm glow over the worn-out booths. They slide into a seat, and a waitress with tired eyes pours them coffee without asking. Tom wraps his hands around the cup, as if soaking in the warmth. Jason watches him for a moment before finally asking, "How'd you end up out here?" Tom exhales, staring into his coffee. Lost my job, then my apartment. One thing after another. It's funny, you never think it's gonna happen to you, until it does. Jason nods. He doesn't say it, but he understands more than he wants to. Admit they eat in silence, the weight of unspoken things settling between them. It's not much, but maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe for tonight, a warm meal and a place to sit is enough. Murphy rests his head on Jason's lap, his eyes flicking between the two of them. Jason scratches behind his ears, glancing at Tom. You ever had a dog? Tom chuckles softly. Yeah, a long time ago. Best friend I ever had. Jason smiles faintly. Yeah, I get that. They sit there for a long time, the city moving around them. But in this moment, they're still. And for now, that's enough. Jason walks beside Tom as they step out of the diner, the cool night air settling around them. Murphy trots along, his tail swaying lazily. The streets are quieter now, the city winding down into a soft hum of distant traffic and flickering streetlights. Tom shoves his hands into his pockets, his breath visible in the crisp air. Been a while since I had a meal like that, he says, his voice softer now, almost reflective. Feels strange. Jason glances at him. Good strange or bad strange? Tom smirks, still figuring that out. They walk in silence for a while, Murphy padding ahead, sniffing at the pavement. Jason finally speaks. Listen, Tom. I don't know what your plans are, but if you need a place to crash for a few nights, I got a couch. Tom stops walking. He studies Jason, searching his face for any sign of pity, but there's none. Just a simple offer. A choice. Tom exhales, rubbing his chin. That's... He shakes his head, chuckling softly. That's real decent of you, man. Jason shrugs. Someone helped me once when I had nothing. Just passing it on. Tom looks down at Murphy, who's watching him with quiet curiosity. Your dog okay with strangers? Jason smirks. Only the good ones. Tom huffs a small laugh. Guess I'll take my chances. They walk back to Jason's apartment, the silence between them no longer heavy, just comfortable. Inside, Jason grabs some spare blankets while Tom settles onto the couch, stretching out with a sigh. Murphy hops up beside him, resting his head on Tom's knee like he's already decided he approves. Tom grins, scratching Murphy's ears. Guess I got the dog's approval. Jason chuckles. Looks like it. He switches off the light, leaving the city glow filtering through the window. For the first time in a long time, Jason doesn't feel the weight of emptiness pressing in. Murphy is here. Tom is here. And maybe, just maybe, things are finally starting to feel like home again. As Jason settles into bed, he hears Tom's voice, quiet but certain. Hey man, thanks. Jason exhales, a small smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, anytime. And for the first time in years, he sleeps without the ache of loneliness gnawing at his chest. Because tonight, the world doesn't feel so empty anymore.